Welcome back to Righteous Rhetoric, everybody. I'm your host, Wes Lowry. Now let's see what's been going on in the news. At first glance, the economy shrank last quarter for the first time since quarter one of 2022. U.S. gross domestic product, or GDP, contracted 0.3% in quarter one, the Commerce Department reported yesterday. Now, this missed economist expectations of a 0.4% increase. That drop can likely be attributed to a massive spike in imports, roughly a 41% increase from the previous quarter, from companies stocking up on goods and materials before President Trump's tariffs took effect. The Commerce Department counts imports as a negative in GDP calculations as they represent spending on foreign goods. However, every data point was touched by the tariffs. Consumer sentiment keeps dropping, but people are still spending money. It's complicated. First quarter consumer spending squeaked up 1.8%, its smallest growth in the last 2 years. But a separate report from the Commerce Department released yesterday showed that consumer spending had its strongest pace of growth for the year in March, likely at least in part because people rushed to make big ticket purchases like cars before the tariffs kicked in. And inflation is down. Kind of. The Fed's favorite inflation tracker, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, say that 3 times fast, rose 3.6% in the last quarter compared to 2.4% in the quarter before. But for March, it jumped only 2.3% compared to the same month last year, down from a 2.5% year-over-year rise in February. Now, one thing is for sure, this data won't make things easier for the Fed when central bankers meet in a few days to weigh inflation in the state of the labor market, especially as payroll providers ADP reports a shockingly low number of jobs added to the private payrolls in April. President Trump's response was this. In a Truth Social post, Trump advised patience and blamed former President Biden for handing over a rough economy. In a cabinet meeting yesterday, the president said people should give us a pass on the first month. We were sort of getting a little bit used to things. When asked in a recent interview about when the economy would officially be a Trump economy, Trump said that it somewhat was, that the good parts were his and the bad parts were Biden. Some compelling stuff there. In other news, Trump and China have reached a temporary deal. Stocks on both sides of the Pacific rallied yesterday after the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced that the two countries agreed to slash their trade-busting tariffs for 90 days following talks in Switzerland over the weekend. The U.S. will drop its blanket tariffs on Chinese goods from 145% to 30%, while China is lowering its duties on American products from 125% to 10%. China also agreed to pause some recently imposed non-tariff trade barriers and is planning to ease restrictions on rare earth minerals exports to the U.S., and this is a report from Reuters. So, what's next? Benson claimed he doesn't want a full economic divorce and said the U.S. and China will keep negotiating to reach a long-lasting trade agreement. President Trump said that he expects to call his counterpart, Xi Jinping, this week. The president insisted that the 145% tariffs aren't coming back, even if the 90-day pause expires without a trade deal, but said the duties would go up substantially absent of an agreement. So, what's there to negotiate? The U.S. says it will aim to even out its trade balance with China to give American companies more opportunities to do business there. It's also trying to get China to stymie illicit fentanyl exports to the U.S. But we're still not back to pre-2025. Even though tensions are easing on top of the current blanket of 30% tariffs, China is still subject to industry-specific tariffs that Trump recently imposed on cars, steels, and aluminum, as well as duties set up in previous years. The current tariff rate is projected to reduce U.S.-bound Chinese exports by as much as 36% over the next year. This is according to the Macquarie Group chief China economist Larry Hu. Adrenaline Kugler, a member of the Fed's Board of Governors, said that she anticipates a scale back of the tariffs will raise prices and stall the economy, but not to the same extent as before. And while diplomats haggle, businesses are expected to rush Chinese products onto U.S.-bound boats, taking advantage of the tariff breather, which the U.S. said could be extended beyond 90 days, but this is not guaranteed to last. While it does help the economy and that the stock market appropriately respond to this as well by going up significantly. This doesn't change the fact that several people in the process here still lost their jobs, and that we don't have anything new with China or anything better than before Trump began Liberation Day or started something new. So, if Trump will get an actual deal that helps America and China post this 90-day deal is kind of the goal and the standard that we should be holding him to. In other news, Qatar gifts Trump a $400 million plane. President Trump is traveling to the Middle East yesterday for his major international trip for his first major international trip of his second term, and is strictly business. Over the next 4 days, Trump will roll through Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates in what's expected to be an economics-heavy visit focused on securing investments from these oil-rich nations who have become increasingly influential in the sectors spanning AI to entertainment. It's a repeat of Trump's inaugural foreign trip from his first term, when he visited Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh, and placed his hands on the glowing orb in the viral photo that happened back then. The royal family of Qatar will reportedly hand over a tricked-out Boeing 747-8 plane to Trump for use as Air Force One before he leaves office. The plane, estimated at $400 million, could be the most valuable gift ever sent to the U.S. from a foreign government, and has raised legal and ethical questions over bribes. According to ABC News, the DOJ insists that it doesn't violate the Constitutions, but outraged Democrats say it does, and that they want to launch an investigation. Now, to explain some of the context here, Boeing has struggled immensely to deliver a new Air Force One. The plane maker inked the contract in 2018, but it won't have the aircraft ready until 2027 at the earliest. Trump's response to this? He said that it would be stupid not to accept a plane from Qatar. The president brushed aside ethical concerns raised by Democrats over the royal family's offer of a Boeing 747 jet to use as Air Force One, responding to reporters' questions about whether he'd accept the luxury aircraft or not by saying, "I could be stupid and say no, we don't want a free, very expensive airplane, but it was, and I thought it was, a great gesture." President Trump also said he didn't plan to keep on using the plane after leaving office, and noted that it would not be a gift to him personally, but to the Department of Defense. Although he plans to visit Qatar the next week as a part of an economic focus tour through the region, the plane is not expected to change hands during this trip. Now, while Qatar is considered a U.S. ally, the nation and its leaders have faced criticism in the past for harboring terrorist groups, funding them, and this includes Hamas. This has led to long-standing ethical concerns about doing business with Qatar, including what it looks like to other U.S. allies when we do business with them, including accept things like incredibly expensive planes as gifts. Not only that, but considering last week Donald Trump said if the tariffs were going to hurt the economy, that little girls could just have $2 or $3 instead of 30 and have 2 pencils instead of 50, and then a week later receives a $400 million plane as a gift. His economic message isn't looking particularly strong right now, or at the bare minimum, is very, let's just say, not in touch with the people. However, in recent economic news, Trump has passed an executive order to lower drug prices. President Trump signed an executive order yesterday that asked Big Pharma to lower its prices in the U.S. so that they are more likely to give us cheaper prices that are charged elsewhere, or to suffer the consequences. However, the execution for this plan appears to be a little unclear. For context, prescription drugs are nearly 3 times as high in the U.S. on average as in other industrialized nations. Under this executive order, we would see a couple of things. 1. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will set unspecified price targets for drug makers, which companies will have 6 months to show that they are at least progressing towards. If they don't, Trump said he'll consider regulatory actions, tariffs on individual companies, and more medicine imports from abroad to leverage a most favored nation policy. A similar America Pays the Least plan fell to legal challenges during his first term. Trump said he wasn't bashing drug companies and threatened to use trade policy to try and make European countries pay drug makers more. In this process, though, it looks as though Big Pharma is still relieved. The industry was expecting a toothier executive order. Instead, the order cites no obvious legal authorities or mandates to lower the prices, according to the New York Times. Hours before Trump's announcement, Congress proposed a $700 billion in healthcare cuts and a policy package that didn't touch on drug prices. Ultimately, many Europeans pay less for RX drugs because single payer healthcare systems can negotiate discounts with drug makers, according to the Wall Street Journal. The U.S. Medicare system can negotiate with Big Pharma until the Biden administration's 2022 Inflation Reduction Act changed the rules for the same drugs. Ultimately, for Trump's executive order here that would lower drug prices to be successful would be incredibly meaningful to Americans and really help with some of the economic strains that many families are facing and dealing with. The concern here is if it can actually happen. However, if it does, it will certainly help this it will certainly help this administration's, let's just say, flailing approval ratings. Now, moving on to something a little bit outside the US, but something a lot of Americans are still excited about. There's a new pope in town. Pope Leo is the first American pope as well. Robert Prevost has been chosen as the first American pope. After one of the fastest papal conclaves ever, Chicago native and Villanova University grad Robert Francis Prevost was elected as the next pope, becoming the first American to lead the world's 1.4 billion Catholics. The 69-year-old Prevost, who is also a Peruvian citizen and fluent in 5 languages, took the name of Leo XIV. In his address to a Vatican crowd, Leo XIV spoke mostly in Italian, emphasizing peace and the need to build bridges. He was seen as a massive long shot to become pope, not even appearing as an option on several odd-making sites. But papal connoisseurs say Prevost recently emerged as a plausible candidate to succeed the late Pope Francis due to his global experience, his calm demeanor, and the ability to unite various factions within the church. And fun fact, there was apparently a lot of betting going on who the next pope would be, because a lot of bettors' money went up in smoke this past week. The prediction market Kalshi says that Prevost, now known as Pope Leo XIV, had a less than 1% chance of landing the top job, showing prediction markets are no match for divine intervention and clandestine deliberation. A handful of gamblers did make out big, though, with one bettor netting $52,641 on a $526 bet. Overall, more than $40 million was spent on betting that the conclave on Kalshi and fellow prediction platform Poly Market. You really can bet on anything nowadays. Moving on to immigration news. A federal judge ruled that on May 9th that immigration authorities did not have sufficient evidence to detain Rumiz Oturk, a Tufts PhD student whose arrest in Massachusetts Street more than 6 weeks ago was one of the several high-profile detentions of international students. Noting that the only evidence against her was that she penned a pro-Palestinian op-ed, the judge said her continued detention potentially chills the speech of millions and millions of individuals in this country who are not citizens. She will now be able to continue her studies while the government continues its immigration case against her. Hours later, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said the government is actively looking at suspending habeas corpus, also known as the right to challenge one's detention in immigration cases. Habeas corpus has only been suspended a couple of times in our nation's history, most notably during the Civil War and when Japanese Americans were put in internment camps during World War II. Considering how history does not look kindly on how we treated people when this has been suspended, we can hope that Stephen Miller and this administration do not continue to explore this option. Given how Miller and other leaders in the administration continue to ignore judge orders and ignore the balance of powers offered by the other branches of government, the accusations of authoritarian behavior continue to hang over this administration. So, after all this news, with world leaders coming to new agreements, with new world leaders emerging, where can we find encouragement today? Well, in a world that's constantly changing, where leaders come and go, we give thanks for a God who is constant and the same, a God who never fails us, and a God that we can find refuge in. Psalm 90, 1-2 says this, "Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you our God. The Lord is eternal. The Lord is a dwelling place. He is our home and our refuge for his people in all generations because God himself is eternal. He has been God since before creation, and God, the Creator, has always assumed, and the Lord has always been God, indicates that he always will be who he is. God does not and will not change. So, in a world that we struggle to keep up in a world where the news is always changing, where our lives may always be hectic, where we don't know what might happen next, we give thanks to a God who is our constant refuge. And I hope that you'll take hope and encouragement in that verse today. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today as we continue to look at all the crazy changes happening in our world. I appreciate you tuning in as we try to keep up with everything, and I look forward to talking with you in just a couple of days. I'm Wes Lowry, and this has been Righteous Rhetoric. I'll see you guys later.